As our panellists are coming up, let me introduce them to you and get our discussion underway. So on my immediate left is Nick Lochner. Nick is studying politics and international relations at University of New South Wales. Good choice of uni there, mate.
I know.
Yep. Although I was there a couple of generations ago. And Nick really rose to some prominence a year or so ago when he launched the Stop Alan Jones campaign. Does anyone remember that? A few hands go up, yeah, okay. Well, I think in the end you got about 100,000 signatures, is that right? So
yeah, close to that.
Close to 100,000, so rose to some prominence and apparently named one of Sydney's 100 most influential people, by the Sydney Magazine for his work in launching the social media campaign. So, Nick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Peter.
And Rachel. Rachel is a professional cellist, having worked as a cellist, as a soloist and chamber musician overseas and in Australia for many years. And over the last, 18 years or so, you said, has now been a teacher with the Australian Children's Music Foundation, ACMF. I was worried I'd get that acronym the wrong way around, but ACMF.
Yes,
and,
it's also the Australian Chicken Meat Federation as well.
Right, not to bear any resemblance whatsoever. Okay, good, glad we clarified that. And further to Rachel's left is Malcolm Wood. Now, I was going to ask if you had to pick one banker amongst the panel, who would it be? Clearly Rachel, right? No. Malcolm is our banker. Malcolm has worked for about 30 years or so in the financial industry, in Hong Kong, New York and in Sydney. Currently, he is the Head of Investment Strategy for Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. So thank you too, Malcolm, for coming. Now the topic, how can we make a difference? Why have we put this on? Well, I'd imagine your experience is not too dissimilar to mine. How many of us have walked down the streets of Sydney to be confronted by someone who's begging, asking for money? I know I see it 2-3 times a day. Sadly, it's often the same people. Or what about when we're sitting at home and perhaps watching a TV show and up comes an ad for an aid organisation and there's the face of a very poor child on TV? You can't help but feel, what can we do? Given that we're so fortunate in this country, how can we make a difference? And it was those sorts of thoughts that motivated today's panel. So thank you so much for coming, and if you had to battle the traffic on George Street with the parade, all the better that you're here. So I thought it would be great to get to know our panellists a little bit more, and then we'll delve a bit deeper. And you can always ask your questions or comments by SMS or Twitter, and they'll come through and I'll be able to pose them directly to the audience. So perhaps Nick, start with you here, mate. The little I read, I gather you sort of almost stumbled across this comment by Alan Jones, the died of shame comment, somewhat by chance. Tell us how it came about.
Yeah, so it was just one evening about a year ago now. I've got plenty of friends who somehow or another seem to get the front page of the Telegraph the night before it prints. So it was a gentleman by the name of John who basically popped it up, and obviously at the time, and probably to some extent still now, the political environment isn't exactly friendly. And so these sorts of comments that were being espoused, we saw it come up on Facebook, the entire front page from the Telegraph. And for me in particular, given the concentrated number of comments in a fairly short period of time, sort of comments that you really don't want to hear in the private sphere, let alone, in the public sphere, it was almost like that metaphorical straw. And it was quite a lot out of frustration that a gentleman by the name of Vinay and I, a close friend of mine, who started the Facebook page. Right. So we sort of snowballed it off from there.
And how did it then become a petition? How did
that... Within probably about 20 minutes, we started finding that you get little notifications, obviously, on Facebook every single time someone likes the page. And they started flowing in. It was just started clogging up the screen. And in the space of maybe about an hour or two, we had 200 to 300 people already liking it. People that we didn't even know at the time. So it already started to sort of canvas. I'm not entirely sure, maybe that could the viral nature of social media is that. So more people are catching on to what's going on, more people are looking and searching for those terms, and more people are finding a result that they're clicking onto. So we thought, do you know what? We heard about the Kyle Sandilands petition that got about 30,000 signatures a few months before it, and we thought, why don't we just put something up, see what happens, try it. And it was just a matter of Googling online petition to find change.org. And went from there. So that's how we just linked it all up and off it went.
And it snowballed from there.
Snowballed from there.
Okay. Well, I'll come back a bit later and ask some of the lessons you've learned from that process. But perhaps, Rachel, it'd be great to hear your story. So you've had a career as a professional cellist, and you still are a cellist in your own right. How did you stumble into the work, perhaps, of helping children?
My mother's a teacher, and her mother was also a teacher, and so I was brought up by teachers, and I was always told you should give back what you can. And I had a pretty tough upbringing. My father was very sick, and I know a number of teachers who taught me out of the goodness of their heart. And so I was very lucky. I had some really good music education, and I was living in Britain at the time, studying. And I thought, I think now is the time. I think I can start giving back to children. And I just went into the local school, and I started to teach. And I'm not a trained teacher, I'm a trained cellist, but I was really good at it, and I really enjoyed it. And then when I moved over here, I started working for the Australian Children's Music Foundation 9 years ago that teach disadvantaged children. So the teaching is a little bit more demanding because you're not just teaching, you're also breaking through a whole lot of barriers. And I found that actually I really like this. And music for me is so precious. It is my lifeblood. And I could share it with other people. And I saw these children just grow. And of course, it all snowballs. You see one child start to smile that you haven't seen smile for 3 weeks, and then you think, oh, I could do that again. And then it becomes more and more. And now I find myself completely consumed by it. And teaching regularly, sort of 500 children a week, just through the power of music, watching these children become a little bit better within themselves.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to hear more about that in a moment. Now, Malcolm, banker, working overseas, tell us how you sort of got involved with International Care Ministries, or ICM.
Yeah, well, Peter, we moved to Hong Kong in 2005. I was doing a regional role with Morgan Stanley, and met a few other guys who were bankers up there. One guy at Morgan Stanley, another one at Macquarie Bank in Aussie. And those two were involved with International Care Ministries and had this passion for the poor. And I sort of had some interaction with supporting aid organisations, but it always felt, going there, well, that's all too hard, particularly from Australia. But when you're in Hong Kong, that excuse doesn't exist because you can go to the Philippines and back in a weekend. And so that's what we did, and seeing the face of poverty close up was challenging, and so got involved with ICM, and it's been a fantastic ride.
So when you go onto the website of ICM, you read quite a moving story of how it began. Can you just tell us briefly about Sharon?
Yeah, so a Chinese lady, Sharon Tan, was helping financially support a helper. A lot of the helpers in Hong Kong, people who do the housework, are Filipino, and so she wanted to see what they'd done with her money, and so she went down to a part of the Philippines called Bacolod, and was blown away by just the depth of poverty. I think the story goes something like this, Peter. She's an interior designer. She had rejected, someone was doing a renovation in Hong Kong, as you can imagine, some pretty high-end apartments in Hong Kong, and she'd rejected a sort of a marble sink from Milan because of one little chink, in the sender back, jumped on a plane, flown to the Philippines, and then seen these people who were literally on death's door, and it transformed her life. She ended up moving down there and became fully involved with ICM.
So it was a real reality check for her.
Absolutely.
It reminds me actually of the story of David Busseau. Some of you may have heard of him, the founder of Opportunity International. His moment was as a 35-year-old builder being called up by one of the Packers, I think Kerry Packer, saying, "Can you fix my drinking cabinet?" And he thought, I've got better things to do than fix Kerry Packer's drinking cabinet, and ended up taking himself overseas, and Opportunity International, the birth of microfinance was the result. So Nick, I've got a question here that's come through, and it relates to one of the questions I was going to ask. What difference did the Alan Jones petition actually make? And perhaps just to broaden the question, how effective is social media and online petitions to bring about change?
Yeah. I think it's a really important question for me as well, philosophically, because as a young person, throughout my entire life, I've always been told, you have great opportunities, make the best of them, become whatever you want to be. And we always find it, particularly as young people, that we're often disenfranchised, and that's a very tough thing for young people to have their voices heard, to get ideas across, and to be able to participate in different aspects of society that a lot of older people can. I think at the moment, young people are Australia's most unemployed individual sector. And so when you put that in perspective with the highest number of graduates and things like that, for us it's quite difficult to get our voices out and to start making that foundation that our parents were able to make for themselves, and build that life that we want to build. So the biggest thing I took away from the Alan Jones campaign was the fact that we united 116,000 different voices as one, and again relates specifically to that part on social media there. That's the whole idea behind social media, is it transforms the way that people communicate, and it places a bit more equality in the way that voices are heard. Because on social media, everyone is equal. There is no one who can exert more power over the other. Every opinion is as valid as the one before it. And what we managed to do is channel 116,000 of those people into taking unified action and putting forward a unified sort of position.
So would it be fair to say that it wasn't necessarily successful in taking Alan Jones off the air?
No.
But it was successful in, as you say, channeling a voice.
Correct.
For people.
Correct. And when we're in a society that, we were talking about this before, about how we're so focused through an economic lens, the economic impacts that campaign had as well were very, very important, because when you're talking to people who only view things through an economic lens, having some sort of economic impact, both to the Macquarie Radio Network, both to Alan, who lost his $250,000 car, and also to a lot of the supporters behind that campaign, particularly the larger ones. That obviously helps to make a...
What about if some of us have no doubt signed petitions for various causes and may want to in the future? Is there at some point a fine line between using social media and perhaps abusing it?
That's one of the questions that were asked of us quite often actually throughout that campaign, because obviously it led to an advertiser boycott, and that did lead to a large number of emails and phone calls and things like that coming through, particularly to smaller businesses, and that's something that at the time concerned us. Mostly because the scale of the impacts that social media has, it's not discriminatory. So whilst people can make a rational decision about where they're going to invest a little bit more of their efforts, social media obviously doesn't do that, and automated systems don't. So what we did find was that the proportion of the impact on smaller businesses was a lot more than on larger businesses who could just absorb the cost over the short term and then return to operating later on. So that's something that did occur to us. That being said, I definitely wouldn't say that at any point throughout the campaign we stepped across the line into abuse, because we took important steps throughout the entire way, and we made this clear through all of our statements as well, that this was a civil campaign, that we weren't going to resort to sort of dirty little tactics and things like that. And we were actually throughout the entire campaign in contact with Russell Tate, the CEO of the Macquarie Radio Network as well. So we did make sure that there was an open line of communication throughout the entire process. And we did make sure that the campaign itself, as it grew, we put the necessary stops in place to make sure that the discourse that was happening was civil. And that's ultimately what we wanted to achieve, because we found Alan's comments so reprehensible.
Right. So you obviously wanted to model transparency.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So just out of interest, this sounds by the way you're describing it as almost a full-time occupation. What happened to your uni degree in the process?
Uni got put on hold for 6 months. I work full-time, so I do 4 days a week at work. I study at the moment full-time as well to try and catch up on all my courses. And this was taking 16 hours out of every day as well. Okay. So that, what we were saying before about putting those stopgaps in place, that was all manual labour. That was we had a team of 12 in the end, of random people that we'd never met before, And Vinay and I would be up there, at 4 a.m. moderating comments, deleting the comments that were offensive, and making sure that everything ran as smoothly as it could.
Well, this touches on another theme, and I'd like to address to you, Rachel. I mean, I don't know what it must be like to play as a cellist in exotic places like Helsinki and Budapest and Vienna and other places you've been to, but did your decision now to devote most of your time to what you're doing come at some personal sacrifice or cost? Is that how you...
I think, playing in Helsinki, playing in Budapest, it's not actually as glamorous as you think it is. You go to a concert hall, it's generally rainy or cold, the coffee is always a bit rubbish, and you play, and often you don't know anybody in the audience, and the whole thing for me about being a musician is to be able to share it with people, share music with people, and you're playing to 400 people and there's a huge gap between you and the first line of listeners, so you have no idea what's going on. They could be asleep for all you know. I came back to Australia really for the weather, and I thought that it might be a bit of a step down, and it hasn't been at all. What sort of personal sacrifice? I guess it depends on how you define sacrifice. I don't spend much time in air conditioning. A lot of my clothes are ripped or dirty because I'm rolling around on the floor, or I'm in really dusty classrooms, or I'm fixing things. I actually think over the 9 years that I've taught for the ACMF that actually I am a far better person than when I started. And so I don't see it as a sacrifice at all. Every child that I have taught has taught me something about myself, as well as me teaching them something about themselves. So
perhaps give us a sense of the sorts, without going into details for privacy reasons, a sense for the sort of children we're talking about here.
I teach children who really have undergone some kind of trauma. So they may have undergone physical trauma, so they may have been beaten, they may have gone through emotional trauma, they may have parents that are incarcerated, they may be parents who, parents are absent, they're in foster care, they may be exposed to enormous amounts of domestic violence. I have children who, when I first start teaching them, if I do this to them, they will flinch. I've had a child in a drum class who has broken a drum, hit a drum. It was a complete accident, and threw the drum on the floor and went and cowered in the corner because she had broken something. Therefore, I could hit her, and that was a really normal part of her life. So these are the sort of children. The best way though that I can describe what I do is just tell you a story of a girl who is very unfortunate looking. She's tall, she's kind of galumpy, she's not pretty, she doesn't have blonde curly hair, she's not very clever, and she sings in a choir. And for Anzac Day, we had learnt a really emotive song, and they were also signing in Auslan Sign Language because I have a friend who is fluent in that. And these children performed, and they performed for community members and their school and their peers. And this kid was up the back, and the choir is sort of 50 children. And this is a sort of girl who walks into a room and will knock a table and everything will fall off. And she doesn't really succeed. And this song was really emotive. And as we were singing this, you could hear people weeping. And then as they walked off, they could see these grown-ups crying. And she looked at me and said, why are these people crying? And I said, they're crying because they really loved what you just did. And she went completely pale and she said, but Rachel, nobody ever likes what I do. And I just went, well, look. And she came and found me. She's now gone to high school, and she said that day was the best day of her life. And that's one little person who obviously is so squashed in her house, and they're the type of kids that a lot of people write off. They call them scum. And they're my mates.
Well, it's really a very moving story. Thank you for sharing that. So Malcolm, when you have come to the Philippines and visited some of the work of ICM, you've no doubt come across much poverty and devastation. And perhaps give us a sense too of the sort of environment that you're talking about where you've seen the work that's operating.
I'll tell one personal story from one of our visits. We went to, there's a variety of different slum environments that you find in a place like the Philippines. So there's the urban slum, which is the sort of what we often see, the shanties, you know, sort of crammed in among the urban areas. Then there's the sort of the fishing village, and then there's the rural slums. And the rural slums are probably the poorest. And we went to one of these slums where ICM was working, and this one here is, because I guess of the Spanish influence, there's some big sugar plantations, and these people are really almost indentured workers, constantly in debt to the owners of the sugar plantations. And we went to this particular place. It was extremely poor, and met the folks that ICM was working with, and a couple of them weren't there. And so we said to the ICM guys, can you come and, you know, go show us through the village? And so we went to this house, and it was a bamboo structure, wooden floors. We stuck our heads through so, you know, no electricity, no water, you know, no sanitation. We stuck our head through, and the lady was nursing this little kid who was even me as a hopeless male could realise that this kid was in trouble. My wife, who's a little bit more astute with these things, said, this kid needs to get to a doctor straight away. So we gave some money to the ICM employee and said, get this kid to hospital. And then we went off and did our other activities for the day, flew back to Hong Kong. You land in Hong Kong, back into your normal life. And we heard from the ICM staff the next day that the little kid had died. And you realise that what we take for granted, you know, our daughter fell over ripsticking on the long weekend, down to Royal North Shore, she's got her arm in plaster. We take this for granted, but we've had people die of broken legs in our slums. So we are so privileged, and it's an honour to be able to partner with these people in making a difference in their lives.
So perhaps just a question on that. How you spoke of the contrast between flying back into Hong Kong. How do you reconcile, and many of us will be in the same boat here, how do you reconcile effectively in wealth management, helping make rich people wealthier, with what you just described? I mean, in your mind, how do you reconcile those two worlds?
Well, I think with each of us, we've got our own opportunities and our own chances to make a difference. So, you know, I come from a Christian perspective, Peter, so I think very much in line with stewardship. So I've been given so much. And, you know, as we've talked about here, opportunity, just why was I born in Australia? But opportunities in education, never had to worry about healthcare. You know, walked into a job with BT and then, you know, Morgan Stanley, etc. And so many privileges and opportunities. I think that with that creates great opportunity to make a difference. So I would sort of almost turn around the question and say, well, my position gives me the opportunity to make a far bigger difference than that for many other people. So I reconcile it by saying, just get out there and go for it. Because we're in a situation, Australians are particularly well equipped to make a big difference.
Perhaps just though, without wanting to let you off on the hook too lightly there's a question here, what is the motivation for what you do? So I'm kind of assuming in this, not only have you given your time, but some of your money towards this sort of work. Is it just a matter of feeling good, maybe to appease your conscience here, or is there something more? Question from the audience.
Yeah, good question. I think, you know, there's a few suits out there. I think we all need to grapple with this question. I actually, might have been a David Basso type, or these sorts of guys who make these dramatic life decisions. I haven't decided to go there. I think that I can still make a lot of money, to be pretty blunt, in the financial services industry, which gives me the opportunity to give a lot away, if I so choose. But also gives me the opportunity to influence a lot of people who can in turn give money away and make a difference through the skills that they've been given. My motivation is, clearly a Christian one. I think that we're called as Christians to serve the poor. But I also think it's a motivation of stewardship, which is, I've been given a lot. I should get out there and give back.
Great. A couple of questions have come through here in terms of, if we were to pick a cause to support, how would we do that? What is the role of institutions, social media in helping us make these decisions? Nick, you've moved on a little bit since the Alan Jones campaign. Share some of the thoughts that you're going through, obviously in an early stage as you're sort of forming your way. How are you thinking about, in the current landscape, how you can contribute and a difference you can make?
I think the biggest thing is what's important to yourself, and that's going to frame the way that you feel and the way that you think, and that's going to translate into your actions as you go forward. So that question there about what cause should we look at supporting, or how do we go about that? Honestly, you should be looking at things that you can be a part of. And I know, mentioning before, that making money means that you can help contribute money, but that's only one aspect of what you need to do if you really do want to make a difference. And so you've got to find a way that keeps you engaged, that keeps you being interactive. So for myself, the Alan Jones campaign, I literally fell into. It wasn't something that we intended to do, it just happened. And before that, I ran as an independent candidate for local government on the basis that I want to see accountability and transparency, and I want to return voice back to the community and have the community have a say and partake in the process. So for me, having gone away after the campaign, I stepped back from a lot of that for a while to try and focus on work and my studies and things like that. But now that I'm sort of thinking about what am I going to be doing next, I'm looking at, I've decided that my career options are primarily, the number one thing I want to do is international aid and development. I do want to start doing some more grassroots work. I do want to become more engaged politically as well. So I do want to find a way that I can help return that sort of temperament behind our national debate to one that's productive and proactive.
So what I'm hearing partly is sort of exploring what your skills and interests are and that sort of thing.
I really agree with that, actually, because for me, I'm a musician. So it would be foolish for me to go and teach finance, because we all know musicians are not very good financial people. And also I come from a teaching background. So music teaching for me, I sort of stepped into, there are certain shoes that are far easier to step into than others. So yeah. I think find what resonates with you and then be courageous and just learn to fly.
So perhaps just fleshing that out one step further, what do you think stops us from taking the first step? If we do feel kind of overwhelmed that we can't make a difference, each of you in different ways have made a first step. So thoughts on... I think listening to other people. If I listened to everybody who told me what not to do, I would be sitting paralysed in the corner. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me that children like that do not like classical music, I would have come here on a private jet. Really, I have been told by so many people that children don't like this, children don't want music, children need to learn to read, they won't like it from a woman, all of this rubbish. And I didn't listen to any of it, and I'm really pleased that I didn't. That's great. We're pleased too. You've raised, Malcolm, notions from a Christian perspective, the idea of stewardship. Another thing which came to my mind from a Christian or biblical perspective is sometimes it's said that the mark of a society is how it treats the most vulnerable members, and that certainly is a big theme in the Bible. Would you see it, not coming from a religious perspective at all though, Rachel, would you see it that way, that how we treat the sorts of children you see really as a mark of our maturity?
I think that as a society we need to take very, very good care of our children, because they are what the country will develop into. And I'm afraid to say that there are an awful lot of Australian children out there, I mean there are in the world, but I deal with the Australian ones, who are not being taken care of. And when I am feeling vulnerable and tired and I've possibly had a few too many wines, they are the children that I cry for. And I think that in order for Australia to really be a better place, we need to take far better care of our children.
Another thought, sometimes it's said that, it's easy to get involved perhaps just by signing an online petition, and that's a very low-cost thing. But it sounds to me also that if you are to make a difference, you really do need to make some sort of sacrifice, be it with your time, your money, your skills. Would you think that that's necessary? If we are to really make a difference, it comes at a price.
No, if everybody here gave me $1,000, I could go out and make an enormous difference. I think
well, that's a price, $1,000.
Well, yes. Well, $50, that's a dinner. I think, though, that some people are far better at standing up and doing stuff. See, I work for an organisation that basically enables me to get up and make a difference. And some of those people who work in that organisation would be the most terrible teachers or couldn't deal with that sort of stuff. So I think that you need to find yourself how you can make a difference. I have somebody who creates backing tracks for me, and that's what he does. Yeah. And I think that we can just feel comfortable finding what we can do, and then allow the people who want to stand in the spotlight or go to the slums or start the media campaign, just let them go and do it, because not all animals are equal.
We've only got a few minutes left here, but a question I'll pose to Nick here, and I know that this is something you're interested in. What do you see the role of government in making a difference? And is leaving it to the government an effective or a lazy option?
Lazy option. And it's for this reason. When you mentioned before about sacrifice, one important thing on that is it's never a sacrifice if you're passionate about it. So when we say, it's so easy in Australian society for us to just defer to our leadership, and we just say to them, oh, you know what, we don't like that politician because of X. Well, it's your vote that matters. It's your vote that a couple Saturdays ago that puts governments in power. But it's also the fact that the last few years we've become so polar opposite. You're either Labor or you're Liberal. Well, quite honestly, try not to bucket yourself, because there's plenty of ways that you can look at things from different perspectives to constructively reach solutions to problems. That doesn't mean that you have to rely on political lines. And so, when you're saying, is it a lazy option? It definitely is. Because the people in government should be representing your voice at every stage throughout their tenure. And they should not be representing a party platform. They should not be telling you what you think. You should be going out to them and saying, this is what Australians believe, this is what I am passionate about, and this is what I want you to vote for when legislation crosses the floor. And so that's something that for me is hugely important, and I'm hugely passionate about. And that's partly why I want to get re-engaged back in that political side of it, because and you mentioned before, if you have certain skills, get engaged with those.
Do you think it's more empowering as well if you describe yourself as a pro person rather than an anti person? So yes. Rather than, all I can think of is abortion. That's a bad topic. But like being anti-education.
No, you're right. Being negative on everything and pointing out flaws doesn't help arrive at solutions. Right, so you're talking about people who have different skill sets. If you have a different skill set and you see things from a different perspective, provide some sort of opinion on that. Provide a perspective, look for solutions and be constructive. I think that we get caught up in differences too much. It should be about, when you said before about how do you feel, is the market being a good person, about how you treat those less fortunate than you. Forget about the less fortunate, right? Because ultimately you're looking at that through your own construct. When we talk about money and power and wealth and all these sorts of things, they are human constructs. They don't naturally exist. What makes you different to someone else is absolutely nothing. You are both human beings. And when we approach everything that we do from that perspective, I think that's when we're going to make progress. I think that's when we're truly going to, get along, for lack of a better phrase, and we're going to make a difference.
Well, thanks for that, Nick, and it is refreshing to hear, because it's sometimes easy to become quite cynical of the whole political process. But I might just pick up on something you said there and pose one last question to Malcolm. There's much talk of philanthropy here these days, but if we get back to the meaning of the word, love of other people, do you think that's really what is behind, or has it become now a little bit of a trendy thing to be sort of a philanthropist? In your area of wealth management, no doubt you come across people who want to be philanthropists or leave a legacy. Is it really care for other people and love which is the motive?
Well, I guess you're always going to have mixed motives, and I guess honestly stepping back and saying, am I doing this perfectly 100%? Making sure you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's before you move. I think you'd be waiting, till the cows come home. So I'd say that don't get hung up on, sort of, are my motives pure? Far better to make a step forward. And I'd echo the comments from the panel here. Find out what you're passionate about. If it's education, if it's health issues, if it's the poor or whatever, follow that. Put a step in the water. Put a toe in the water. And in the case of ICM, come see me afterwards. We'll get you up there and have a look. And I'm sure it'll be life-changing for you.
Well, please join me in thanking our panel for sharing so much today.